Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors. This YouTube channel is dedicated to getting our youth more involved in the outdoors. To do this, I'll be out with family and friends doing all sorts of outdoor adventures. This week on Jared Scott Outdoors, we are heading out after antelope. Now I've got Jared Mackrory with me. You have actually seen him a handful of times. Let's see, your son came out and hunted how long ago?
It was 5 years ago.
All right, so 5 years ago his son Nathan hunted the same year that my son Cade, and they both were able to get some fantastic animals. Jared was lucky enough to draw this year. Antelope has become very difficult to draw, so this is kind of exciting to get this tag. I have yet to draw a rifle tag, but Jared did. So he was kind enough to let me come along. This is just a fun hunt for me. I really enjoy it because I've been pounding the mountains looking for elk, and it just wears on you. And so I enjoy coming out in this country where it's a little bit more low-key, but there is kind of a difficult factor as far as trying to find a certain size of animals, because you're looking at 12 to 14, 15-inch antlers, horns. Let's say this right. So Jared, what are you looking for on this hunt?
Well, my son got one that was 13 inches. I'd like to beat him. 14 inches is, I don't know. I heard 14 is the number that makes it a mature buck, so 14 or higher, I'd be thrilled.
All right, so we're going to get after some pronghorn and see if we can get him a big buck. So as I mentioned, we're on a pronghorn hunt, and drawing a tag for pronghorn seems to be about 1 in 20 at best for most of the units with a rifle tag. That means on average you'll only draw this tag once every 20 years. A tag like that you don't want to take lightly and take just anything. You want to make it count, at least for guys our age, because who knows if you'll draw it again. This particular unit, and especially where we were hunting today, is not like many units in that you can see most of it from the road. So you have to actually get out and do some hiking, at least if you want to make sure that you're not missing any antelope that are hidden in draws or away from the roads, which of course is where we'd expect to see some of the bigger ones, as this hunt had been going on for a few weeks. We headed up to a high point that overlooks an area antelope seem to hang out in. Once on top, we sat down, pulled out the spotting scope, and had a look around. Right off the bat, we found a few goats scattered here and there below us, but honestly, nothing stood out as even close to being a shooter, just some does and some small bucks. However, when we looked behind us, further up instead of below us, we spotted two groups right near each other with a lot of antelope. With it being the tail end of the rut, there was a good chance of having a big buck when there were over 20 pronghorn in the mix. With the sun having just risen, the angle of the sunlight hitting the animals made it hard to get a clear picture. That being said, we did find a buck very quickly. It appeared to be a decent buck and was kind of heading closer to the other group, like it was checking them out. There was also a pretty good buck with that other group. Hard to tell how big, but seemed pretty good. However, the one on the top of the ridge seemed to act a little more dominant, like it could go wherever it liked. But in reality, we really couldn't tell how good they were. One had pretty good height and width, while the other just seemed thicker. That's about all we could tell from this distance.
He's not very wide, which doesn't matter on antelope. Yeah, I mean, from there it looks like his mass goes up pretty high.
Eventually, all the antelope walked over the ridge they were on and out of sight. So from up on this high spot, we found 4 different groups of antelope, I think, and one of them is close. It's a small buck, definitely not worth anything. Furthest one, I can't see any horns, so I don't think it's worth trying to go. But then we've got 2 groups behind us that are kind of intermingling a little bit, 2 different bucks. Both of them look pretty decent, still too far away to really verify, so we're going to sneak in and have a closer look, but something to start with. They were still over a mile off, so we couldn't really see them well enough to gauge the size. There was a bigger buck with each group. They looked pretty good, but again, when you're trying to judge between a 13-inch horn and a 14-inch horn, you need a good look. Since the antelope were out of sight, we headed on over to get as close as possible and get a good look at them. We figured we could sneak up on the ridge that we last saw them on, as they ought to be in the draw below, and possibly in range for a shot if one was a shooter. Sneaking in very carefully, we inched over until we spotted the first pronghorn. It turned out they had dropped down and were actually heading up the other side already, so further than we expected. They weren't spooked or anything, but feeding away and covering more ground than we thought. However, now they were actually starting to spread out and stay put, like they'd found an area they wanted to feed in or maybe even bed down in. Either way, now it was time to really get a good eye on the bucks in the group. It turned out there were actually 3 bigger bucks, a few small bucks, and lots of does. Out of those 3 bigger bucks, one of them was ruled out. It was a little bit smaller than the other 2. The other 2, however, were tougher to gauge. We had 2 bucks that were very different from each other. One was a bit more narrow, but seemed pretty heavy, while the other was wider and maybe taller, but not as thick. One reason antelope are tough to gauge is because their horns curl on the top, and they all curl differently. Some have a lot of curl and some barely any. So a tall-looking buck that doesn't curl much might actually not be as big as one that doesn't appear as tall because it has a big curl. A heavy-horned animal also may look smaller than it really is. If you see a wide pronghorn buck, that makes it look better, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're very big. There's also the cutters to consider, the part that sticks out halfway up their horns. Some have small cutters, just maybe sticking out 2 inches, while one that sticks out past the horn about 3 inches is actually pretty solid. It really is a game of inches. So you can start to see there's all kinds of factors that go into trying to judge a good pronghorn from an average one. In this case, the one that looks the best at just a quick glance is the wider buck, that appears pretty tall, but it doesn't curl that much on top. Meanwhile, the other buck that's more narrow doesn't seem as tall, but it actually seems pretty heavy, and it really does curl in pretty significantly. As far as its cutters go, they don't seem super impressive, but when the horns are heavy like this, it can make the cutters and the overall length look smaller than they really are. So which one would you take, or would you just pass on both of them? That's what we were trying to figure out as well.
The top one has the mass.
All right, so we got to talk about this one a little bit. We've been watching this herd of about 20. There's 3 bigger bucks in there, some little guys as well. One that's definitely the biggest one carries its mass really well up high. I think it's right on the bubble of maybe shooter buck or not. First day, he's got a few days to hunt. Will you find one any bigger and regret it? I don't know. Jared, what do you think?
I don't know. Part of me thinks this is probably once in every 20 years I get to do this. So maybe not again. But what do they say? Don't pass on the first day what you'd happily shoot on the last day. And I would happily shoot this guy on the last day. So I don't know.
So I guess we're gonna sneak in, see if we can get in a little closer. Have a better look. Packing up our stuff, we slipped back out of sight and then started heading to our next spot. We had decided to swing all the way around them and come in from above them on the other side. We just had to get out of sight on the other side of the ridge, which should allow us to get around them without being seen. We did have one lone antelope we had to work around, hoping that it wouldn't spook the others, but outside of that, we were able to make it to the other side without incident, or being seen. Once on the other ridge and up above them again, we once again slowly inched our way to the edge to get a look at the antelope and hope they hadn't moved. We had a big rock outcropping that would work perfect as cover. As we were sneaking in, one of the bigger bucks came into view as it was working back and forth, checking out a few random does that were on the outskirts. When it spotted a little buck off in the distance, it headed right to it, which kept it out in the open. So we just made sure it wasn't looking our way and kept inching our way to that big rock that would hide us once we got there. When we got there, we took off our packs and then peeked around and found a few of the pronghorn, but not nearly all of them. The wider buck was in view, bedded up below us, and honestly looked pretty tempting. The buck that was out and about checking out those random antelope was the smaller of those big ones. So that left the heavier, narrow one unaccounted for. And that's actually the one we had decided on taking if it still looked good from this closer position. But for the moment, we couldn't find it. After a time, however, a few pronghorns started walking into view. They were below us and coming out of a small area we couldn't see into. Most likely the big buck was with that group. But since they were starting to walk out and into view, we assumed it would appear as well, and so Jared got set up just in case it did. Sure enough, it eventually walked out and right into view. Now we could have one more good look at it. Well, after a few minutes of watching, Jared decided it was a buck he would be happy to take, even though it was the first day of the hunt. Now we just had to get a good shooting position. You'd think it would be easy, but since the buck kept walking around and went behind the rock out of our view, Jared kept having to readjust his position to see it.
I am on him if you want him. He's the one on top.
Finally, he was set and ready. With both bucks next to each other, we had to make sure we were both looking at the same one.
The one that's looking away. I don't know how big he is, though.
Once Jared knew I had it in my camera view, he steadied for the shot.
Yeah. You got him.
You got him. It's official. No catch and release here. Well, Jared, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, just like that, the hunt is over. I've been wanting to get an antelope since I came out here with my son Nathan 5 years ago. And there we have it. It's on the ground. So now we get to see whether it's bigger than his, smaller than his, whether we misjudged it from across the canyon. We'll have to go see.
So it's tough on these antelope when you're trying to judge between an inch. You know, is this a 13-inch goat, 14-inch goat? You can kind of use the ears, but when they curl, it's hard to judge how much of that curl, you know, how many more inches do you have or not have in that curl. This one seemed pretty heavy, which also hides length, makes them not look as tall or, you know, whatnot as they are because they're heavy. This one appeared to be heavy. It's a pretty buck. So I don't know. It's kind of a fun thing to try to judge these and hunt them. I enjoy hunting them. Way easier than the elk hunts we've been doing lately. So I like the break. But anyways, we're gonna head down and see if Jared made the right decision. Well, he made the right decision. It better be. It's over.
Well, with the buck down, it was time to go have a look and see if we'd made a good choice.
He's taller than I was expecting. Like he started getting smaller.
Yeah.
as we were walking. Oh, yeah, he's good. I'm happy with that.
No, it looks.
I think he's.
Yeah, he's got some serious length right here.
Yeah.
Like that. That's nice. That's pretty.
Yeah,
I like
he
that.
started to look smaller when we were sitting out there.
And I like that. Exit's perfect. Hey, I think he's a pretty buck.
Good mature. I'm really happy with that. If we had passed on that and not got one and then I'd seen this, I would have been really unhappy.
This buck ended up being taller than both of us thought. Jared was hoping for a 14-inch goat, and instead he tagged one with 15-inch horns. This was one of those cases where the mass of an antler makes it look shorter than they really are. Definitely on the top end of most mature pronghorn. A solid buck for sure.
Yeah, his cutters are up there at 7. They're at least an inch higher.
Yeah.
They're pretty tall up there.
And this is cool, the little, I don't know, the character. Yeah, he really curls down, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's got a big old curl.
Symmetrical. Yeah.
Well, there you go, Jared.
I'm
It's
very
official.
Oh, he's a good looking buck.
All right, here we go. Jared, tell them what you think of your goat. As we mentioned, we didn't know for sure what we had, so it's in your hands. What do you think?
I'm really happy with it. It's a lot taller than I was worried it would be. After I shot it and we were sitting up on the rock up there, I was looking down and it started getting smaller. But as we walked up to it, it looks really good. I'm really happy with it.
It's a pretty goat. The mass on it definitely makes it appear that it's not quite as tall as it is, but the cutters are nice and tall. It's thick throughout. It's just a solid mature goat. So kind of a fun hunt. Faster than I expected. We had a few days we were planning on putting to this, and halfway through our first day, it's a done deal. So anyways, that is going to wrap up our antelope hunt for this year. Congratulations, Jared. He's now got bragging rights for his son. And you know, not that us dads need to have bragging rights, but you know, sometimes you got to do that. So anyways, this was a fun hunt. Appreciate you letting me come along. It's always good to go out with Jared. So we had fun. Anyways, we will see you next week. These episodes can't be done without your help. You know the drill. Please make some comments, like, and subscribe, and I'll keep working on more videos.